PAS 2038, retrofit of non-domestic buildings. PAS 2038, we are probably all very aware, forms part of the BSI, the British Standards Institute Retrofit Standards Framework. And it sits quite nicely with PAS 2030. PAS 2030 is our installer standard for installing under retrofit, under funded projects. We've then got PAS 2035, which, as we will all know, is our domestic retrofit standard, our overarching standard for domestic retrofit, where we have PAS 2030 intrinsically linked with it. We have BS 5250, which is about the management of moisture within our buildings. We have BS 7913, which is the older and traditional buildings standard. So understanding the difference between our modern day buildings and our older and traditional buildings. And then we have the MCS standard, which is our microgeneration certification scheme. It is the standard for the installation of renewable technology, or as we call our LZC technologies, low and zero carbon. And whereas PAS 2030 linked with PAS 2035 linked to 2030 and MCS looks at the domestic building stock within the UK, we have PAS 2038, which is very specifically the non-domestic standard. Okay, it is the standard for looking at the energy efficiency improvement for our commercial buildings. Now, these buildings can be national or local, they can be run by national or local government schemes. But I think the key thing that we all need to remember is our PAS standards 2035 and 2038 is an absolute necessity when we are working with any funding, any government funding, any procured funding. And I think quite a lot of us in this room will be very familiar that if you are tendering for works in the commercial sector at the moment, they are stipulating PAS 2038 as a requirement for the tendering of those works. Because PAS 2038, again, very similar to PAS 2030, it is basically a process flow. It is a process flow making sure that we are looking at the building in a holistic manner, okay? We are looking at the building as one system as opposed to different individual systems within that property. Now, when we're talking about, for example, retrofit in a hospital, it is very different to retrofit in a two-bed mid-terrace. But realistically, the bare bones of PAS 2038 is the same. And when we start talking about the standard and the clauses, you're going to see very similar, very key alignments with PAS 2035. But you will find that this standard is slightly less descriptive in terms of what it needs, in terms of roles, which is why the Retrofit Lead Professional is a really, really key role for you to take forward and to understand, okay? So 2038 national or local government schemes for retrofitting of commercial buildings. Remember, guys, retrofit is simply adding in post-construction, okay? And when we're talking about energy efficiency, it is adding in something to improve the energy efficiency of that building. It's going to take programs of retrofit initiated and or funded by landlords and commercial property portfolio holders. It could be retrofit of individuals by individual buildings by their owners and occupants. And it can be integrated to form part of broader repairs and maintenance related to individual buildings or with building stocks. So PAS 2038 can be initiated in a number of ways. Now, the intention of PAS 2038 is for anyone engaged in the improvement of energy efficiency, energy performance, or sustainability of non-domestic buildings. And something that's really, really, really at the forefront of my focus within this industry is that sustainability element. Sustainability element is not just improving the energy efficiency of the building. Sustainability is really understanding the building, understanding how we can make that building right for the energy efficiency improvements. It's about making sure that that building has longevity, including the planned maintenance, including making the building as good as it can be, as well as improving the energy efficiency. And PAS 2038 can be initiated by owners or managers of the building. It can be initiated by tenant property managers, building professionals. It's going to engage contractors. It's going to engage builders and certainly installers of energy efficiency measures, or as we like to call them, EEMs. Now, non-domestic properties, non-domestic covers quite a variety of properties, and they certainly can include all of what is on your screen at the moment. So we're talking factories and workshops, warehouses and storage, education buildings, schools, colleges, shops and commercial services, offices, hotels, transport, health, social and community, churches, agriculture, defence, arts and leisures, and multi-residentials. Anything that is not classed as a private residential dwelling comes under the non-domestic portfolio. Now, there are some crossovers with 2035 in residential style properties, but we will potentially look at that later on, or if not, we will certainly touch on that in the questions part at the end of the session. Because quite often, if you've got a residential style, as long as it hits certain criteria, it can be run under 2035, but with the addition of a non-domestic energy assessor in your team. Okay. Remember, guys, any questions, pop them in the chat for me. All right. So, PAS 2038, very similar to PAS 2035, is broken down into clauses. Again, it is a gigantic process flow to make sure that we are looking at the building as one system, that we are setting ourselves up well, that we are installing as best we can be, and that we are reviewing our work. So clause 4, the first clause, is why we're here today. It is setting up, it is the project inception, setting up a project team, which is inclusive of our retrofit lead professional. We then go on to clause 5, which is the assessment of the building for retrofit, very much the same as 2035, but with some significant differences in terms of the assessment. Clause 6 is the evaluation of improvement options. Clause 7 is the agreement of our intended outcomes. Clause 8 is the preparation of an improvement plan. Clause 9, design and spec of our retrofit work. Clause 10 is our statutory approvals. 11 is our retrofit work on site, our installation. Clause 12 is our testing, commissioning and handover, including our building logbook and any fine tuning. 13 is our evaluation. And clause 14 is our claims of compliance. So again, there is an alignment with the PAS 2035 standard in terms of stages that we need to be identifying and aligning to. So, most retrofit projects involve at least one building professional, and many projects involve several with a range of roles. The selection and appointment of the project team is a matter for the client and will depend on the scale, complexity, and nature of the project. And this is an important one because within our project team, we can have a number of designers, we can have a number of assessors, and we can have a number of installers. But if we do, we need to appoint the leads of those teams. So we're always going to have a lead designer, a lead assessor, and potentially a lead installer. And due to the nature and complexity of certain commercial buildings, quite often it is really important to have that mix of skill and ability within your project team. Now, the retrofit lead professional. Okay, let's start off with clause 4.1. The clause states every retrofit project compliant with PAS 2038 should be overseen by a retrofit lead professional who shall be appointed to that role by the client. Now, the retrofit lead professional should be there from inception to completion, including handover. There are some significant similarities to the retrofit coordinator. But when we are talking about the retrofit lead professional, there are going to be some significant technical differentiation within their skills and within their abilities. And quite often, the retrofit lead professional is going to be chosen based on the project. So, for example, if you've got a project that is dealing with renewable technology, your retrofit lead professional really should be having a background in electrics. If it's dealing with a fabric first, if it's dealing with the building structure, then your retrofit lead professional really should have a background within energy efficiency and within buildings. Now, your retrofit lead professional, they must be appointed, as I've said, according to the nature of the project. They absolutely can be employed by the client or contractor or installer. They can also fulfill other roles in the project team. So your retrofit lead professional can be the designer, can be the assessor, But if you are appointed as the retrofit lead professional, you do really need to be seeing the project through from inception right through to completion and handover. So, who would make a good retrofit lead professional? This is not an exhaustive list, but this is things that you need to be thinking about when appointing that retrofit lead professional, whether they are in-house or they are subcontracting, okay? These qualities and experiences are really, really sought after. Does the retrofit lead professional need to be an NDEA qualified? Good question, Joshua Wakelin. The answer is no, they do not. Ideally, your retrofit assessor is going to be qualified NDEA because you do need a full assessment in terms of energy usage for your commercial building. So you can use SBEM. So ideally, your retrofit assessor is going to be a non-domestic energy assessor to be able to provide those calculations for you. But there is no necessity for your retrofit lead professional to be an NDEA. What I will say on that question is if your commercial project is residential in status, so it is, for example, halls of residence or a care home, and your building is less than 3 stories and is of masonry construction, so not concrete, it can be run via PAS 2035, but then there is a requirement that your coordinator is an NDEA. Okay, so yes, in terms of we definitely need a non-domestic energy assessor within the project, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the retrofit lead professional. Hope that answers your question. So your retrofit lead professional, you're going to need somebody with strong stakeholder management. Very much the same as the coordinator, they are acting on behalf of the client and the contractor, okay, and the public. So they're going to be neutral in terms of who they are presenting. They're going to be making sure that this project is running from start to finish, is compliant, and also evaluating that what the project set out to do was actually achieved. So strong stakeholder management is key. Ideally, we're going to be looking for somebody with experience working within the non-domestic retrofit sector. It is a completely different ballgame to commercial retrofit, and you are dealing with a wider range of individuals with very, very unique and technical skill sets. So having that experience in non-domestic retrofit is a very big tick box. An ability to identify, assess and manage the technical and process risks of the project. Again, very much aligned with the retrofit coordinator. They need to be looking at potential risks. They need to be looking at the risk category of the project and mitigating at the start or as they are going through. An ability to understand the client's budgets. I want to say this with a little bit of a giggle because I know that we all feel the strain sometimes with clients' budgets, where clients will have budget to do one thing, but actually we need to be looking at the building as a whole. So we need to be understanding, all right, yes, the budget is for this, but actually we need to do some severe planned maintenance first. Otherwise, what you're planning to do is not working. So really understanding the client's budget and going back to strong stakeholder management, working with those on what the client wants and what is absolutely achievable for that project. Being able to coordinate other members of the project team, again, dealing with very, very skilled individuals within the project team. The retrofit lead professional doesn't necessarily have to have all of those skills themselves, but absolutely needs to be able to coordinate and lead that project team with the understanding of non-domestic retrofit and can effectively communicate updates and reports to client and project members 100%. When we are talking about commercial, when we are talking about domestic retrofit, I always say it comes down to 2 things, communication and education. It's no different for PAS 2038. It's just sometimes your clients are going to be slightly different. You need to be able to communicate effectively and you need to be able to educate them. Educate your clients, educate your landlords on the process, on the behaviours, on what's being installed. So a retrofit lead professional who can absolutely nail those 2 things, again, is another really strong tick box for this position. Now, as we've said, the retrofit lead professional absolutely can take on a number of different roles, but as per 2035, we need to declare any conflicts of interest. So where a conflict of interest arises between the RLP's duty to protect the client's interest, the public interest, and the employer's interest, it shall be declared to the client so that arrangements can be made to manage it. Okay? Retrofit lead professionals can be employed by a number of different parties, but they must remain neutral in terms of the project compliance and the project accessibility. Okay? So Austin, I'm just going to hand over to you.
Well, thank you for that, Laura. So what I'm taking over now is myself and Laura have evaluated the standard and framed it from the point of what is the retrofit lead professional's role through the various clauses of the standard. So when I go through it now, it's really looking at what the involvement is of the retrofit lead professional as described by the standard. But please bear in mind that this is what the standard determines, but it's not really what you may use in every practical instance of a project being delivered. The retrofit lead professional may take on a more expansive role from there. So when we look at project inception, appointment and briefing of a professional team, so we've got to define choice of the retrofit lead professional, as Laura's indicated, based on the nature of the project. And we've also got to define the mechanisms at which the retrofit lead professional is being appointed. But firstly, the retrofit lead professional should have a comprehensive understanding of that building that's being undertaken for a retrofit project. So it is a requirement that they attend site and have that level of understanding around the building. They should identify and document the client's interest and the public interest and take appropriate action so that they are protected. And that the main important part here is that they agree the intended outcomes of the project with the client. So fundamentally, what is that client trying to achieve through the delivery of the project on site? So that should be recorded, and the document that's referred to throughout the standard is the project brief. So typically, once the intended outcomes have been documented, it would be recorded in the project brief. So record and report the evidence of the project's compliance with the purpose of this PAS, and coordinate the activities, my mistake, oversee the project from inception to completion, including handover of any fine tuning and evaluation on behalf of the client, lead the identification and assessment and management of technical project risks, coordinate the activities of the other members of the project team, and record and report the evidence of the project compliance with this PAS. So when we move from actually commencing the project and we move into the assessment now, the retrofit lead professional shall be notified if features or defects that were not observed during the assessment or included in the assessment report have been identified, and that these shall form part of the report to the client. So fundamentally, during the assessment process, we've got to have a clear understanding about what defects are present within the building, and we have to evaluate the nature of these defects to determine whether the retrofit project can proceed. And it's this level of defect reporting that should be provided to the retrofit lead professional so they can validate your decision about the suitability of this building to move forward thereafter. The retrofit lead professional should select the appropriate method to estimate annual energy use and consumption with the professional project team. So again, it's about establishing the mechanisms at which you're evaluating this building in the first instance, and this then should relate back to the intended outcomes and the nature in which the project is going under for retrofit, and then determine and record that within the project brief. And then the retrofit lead professional shall review the assessment report with the lead assessor to confirm that the information in it provides the basis of a retrofit design and complies with the purpose of this PAS. So again, that the information collated within the retrofit assessment provides the ability for the design team to take this then and move forward with it from there. The next part of the standard is about the evaluation of improvement options. There is no defined role for the retrofit lead professional in the evaluation of improvement options. But again, what we've said before is, although it's not defined in the standard, typically the retrofit lead professional would be involved in establishing that the intended improvement options meet the intended outcomes of the project to make sure that they're both fundamentally aligned and that they have that comprehensive understanding at that stage. So once we've identified these improvement options, this is where we should be looking at the agreement of the intended outcomes and making sure that these are documented. So the retrofit lead professional in this instance shall provide the clients with copies of the assessment report and the improvement option evaluation report, and agree and record the intended outcomes of the project. So again, the intended outcomes that were discussed and documented at clause 4 really at the project's inception, and what they are now, they may change. So the purpose of this project brief and these intended outcomes, they do remain live, and they are then amended throughout the project, or they can be amended throughout the project depending on what's been identified at assessment, what's been discussed in design stage, how this impacts the client budget. There may be a variety of factors that impact this project and the intended outcomes being changed. So the retrofit lead professional should ensure that once the intended outcomes of the project have been agreed, the brief of the project shall be amended accordingly. So once we've amended that project brief, this is where we should then define the preparation of an improvement plan. So the improvement plan, again, should detail what's going to be covered within that project over a period of time. The intention is it should hit within a 2050 target to meet the statutory net zero emissions, but it could be significantly quicker than that period there. But as Laura referred to before, it's got to adopt an holistic approach, and it may be done over various stages. The intention is that the quicker wins are adopted first, and that some of the more significant capital investments potentially that might have lower payback may be done at a later date, but that should all be documented within the improvement plan, and the retrofit lead professional should have a comprehensive knowledge of that improvement plan, because their role may extend well beyond the first phase of the project. Their role may be involved for several years over the period of that improvement plan.
Austin, we've just had a question. It's a really good question, actually, from Josh Wakeling. Are you aware of any software tools for improvement option evaluation, or is this just normally a written report? It's a really, really good question.
Yeah, so I mean, the software typically out in the market might not do the improvement plan as we're going to we'll talk about later. I mean, the improvement plan typically is quite a comprehensive document looking at a variety of insulation measures and M&E measures and combining them over to a predefined plan, and at which point you would put the client's budget in to determine kind of that period thereafter. I haven't seen or not familiar with softwares that would do it into that level of format. There are obviously extensions of software. You probably well, Elmhurst have a software out there that kind of carries out this non-domestic energy assessment, and then you can extend and use that data to build into the report that I've seen. But as a full turnkey software solution, I'm not familiar with one. So if anyone does have one that they feel would suit that, fit that bill, then that would be certainly beneficial for us all to collectively discuss. So moving over from the preparation of an improvement plan, we've got design and specification of retrofit work. So where the proposed improvement measures consist of only proprietary systems and the professional team does not include a designer, the designs and specifications obtained by the specialist shall be reviewed for suitability and compatibility by the retrofit lead professional. So in this instance there, the retrofit lead professional can validate and decide to move forward with the project based on proprietary systems. The retrofit lead professional should support in the flow of information between the lead designer and the contractor or installers. They're there to facilitate questions, any additional information that may be regarded for the project. They may have involvement with the client to ask for their feedback on various considerations at this design stage from there. But their purpose of this part is mainly to facilitate the flow of information. And then if the proposed design exceeds the agreed budget or funding available, the retrofit lead professional shall agree amendments with the client with a view of adopting as many of the most cost-effective energy efficiency and emissions reductions measures that can be afforded. So going back to the part that we said before, that understanding the client's budget is key, so they can give the most sound advice about variations to designs of the project and make sure that fundamentally the project has and meets the most or as many as the intended outcomes that was originally discussed within the project. When we move from there, the next one for statutory approvals, the retrofit lead professional in conjunction with a project team shall advise the clients about the need for statutory approvals required for the project and either make the applications necessary or cooperate with other persons who will be leading on this. So some projects may have separate appointed practices that may do all these applications on their behalf, or some smaller by nature may lead or may lean on the retrofit lead professional to support in the delivery of these applications. So again, it comes from many different avenues, but the retrofit lead professional shall have an understanding of what applications are fundamentally needed for that project and approvals, and then make sure that between the relevant stakeholders that they are facilitated thereafter. So one of the bigger requirements of the standard is this retrofit work on site. So again, this has changed a little bit through the latter revision of PAS 2035 and 2030 of last year. But fundamentally, the retrofit work that's delivered on site as it stands in PAS 2038 should align to the requirements of PAS 2030. So fundamentally, the installer that's been appointed should have a quality management system in place that aligns to PAS 2030. That's or MCS, depending on what's been installed. So that's what the standard wants you to follow at the moment for the purpose of PAS 2038. And I say this just because the revision to 2030 at the back end of last year infers that that standard's to be exclusively used for buildings of residential nature. So there's a bit of a conflict between the two standards at the moment. So I suspect PAS 2038 would be amended quite soon to reflect their interpretation of the installation provision from there. But in essence, the 2030 standard and the retrofit work on site should identify the instructions and recommendations provided by the manufacturers for the materials and technologies, the requirements of any quality assurance, warranty, guarantee and reasonable satisfaction of the retrofit lead professional. But fundamentally, the installation of the work on site has to be understood by the retrofit lead professional and they are satisfied with your intended approach to delivery. So their understanding of that has to be clear throughout that. So when we move forward from that, the installer shall confirm that the retrofit lead professional and make their identity or role known to all throughout the installation process. So the retrofit lead professional or the team that they appoint is in a quite a fortunate position during the installation stage because they should have access to that project at any given time. Really, they can ask the questions, be able to observe the installation process, ask for updates and schedules, and really get a comprehensive understanding of that project delivery. So where a project involves retrofitting a building of more than 1,000 square meters, the retrofit lead professional should be provided with a copy of an inspection and test plan. So again, the term of 1,000 square meters is distinct throughout the standard. That's their differentiation between the mechanism for more extensive works or slightly reduction in work. So that 1,000 meters squared is used throughout the standard. For all projects, the contractor and or installer shall make the provision of the retrofit lead professional to have unrestricted access to the site. Where any part of the work is not to the reasonable satisfaction of the retrofit lead professional, the work shall be recorded in writing and photographed. If during the installation work, the contractor or installer wishes to omit any specified material or system or to be substitute to an alternative, the proposed change shall be put to the retrofit lead professional for their approval. So at the conclusion of the work of the site, the contractor or installer shall provide the retrofit lead professional with a schedule of all agreed and implemented additions, omissions or substitute and a specified materials, products or systems. So again, just to kind of summarize on that bit there, their role is very much to oversee the installation process. Any proposed changes or any deviations to the schedule needs to come through to the retrofit lead professional. So kind of when we follow up on some of the questions shortly, and I've seen sight of some of them prior to that, that's why the retrofit lead professional is often appointed by the installer or is often appointed by an independent consultant, because they are well versed with understanding the installation processes, the nature of changes, and are confident in recording them, evaluating them, and determining the risk of these changes to make sure the client's needs are safeguarded fundamentally. So when we look at testing, commissioning, handover, and building logbook and fine tuning, so I've grouped them together. So when I talk to this 1 to 4, each of those instances are relevant to testing, commissioning, handover, and the fine-tuning process. So testing, commissioning, and handover is the responsibility of the installer and the retrofit lead professional. So the retrofit lead professional is there to validate what's been determined in the design stage, or the inspection and test plan is actually being facilitated, and the flow of information is being received as well. The retrofit design shall identify all records that are to be supplied to the client via the retrofit lead professional. So after the retrofit work has been handed over, the retrofit lead professional shall arrange for a new and updated deck or new and updated EPC to be prepared for the client. On completion of any fine-tuning, the reasonable satisfaction of the client, building managers and the retrofit lead professional, the building logbook shall be updated to include a record of the changes made and the new contract settings and meter readings. So again, with it being a commercial retrofit project, there is a requirement for a building logbook. The building logbook typically is an extension to the O&M manual, and it's meant to bring everything together quite nicely. And it is typically used on buildings over 1,000 square meters again, but it's got quite a comprehensive list of documents that has to be included within that. And I'll just move on to that now. So the retrofit lead professional shall retain copies of the report of the pre-retrofit building assessment, the report of the improvement options evaluation, the improvement plan, the retrofit design, notices of any statutory including any conditions, the schedule of all agreed emissions and substitutes of materials, products and systems, all test certificates and commissioning records, the building logbook, if it's prepared, and that's on the basis that it is over 1,000 square meters, the operation and maintenance instructions and manuals for all installed products and systems, warranty and guarantee certificates, all other relevant documentation necessary for the safe, efficient and effective care and operation and maintenance of all the installed measures. So at that moment in time, the retrofit lead professional shall have sight of all this, either by way of electronic format or hard copy from there. So when we move into one of the more important stages to validate the suitability of the projects, we then look at the evaluation of the projects. So there are 2 levels of evaluation that should be carried out as appropriate, and the role of the retrofit lead professional is a key instigator in determining which of the evaluation stages or whether both needs to be adopted. So the basic evaluation shall be applied for every completed non-domestic retrofit project. So the basic evaluation typically consists of a questionnaire with a pre-described list of questions validating whether it's met the stakeholders' requirements, whether it hit the intended outcomes, whether there are any deviations from scope along the way. That's intended to be more of an interview-based questionnaire. The output of that is then validated to determine whether it falls into this further evaluation. So further evaluation should only be applied only to projects for which, in the opinion of the client or the retrofit lead professional, the basic evaluation indicates that the outcomes are significantly different than those originally agreed and intended, or there are unintended consequences of the retrofit work or the occupants are dissatisfied with the project. So as I've gone through, the purpose of that initial interview-based questionnaire is really identify tangibly whether we feel comfortable that the intended outcomes have been achieved, but it's also intended to take quite a lot of views from the stakeholders within that building and relevant to that project to determine that they feel it's met the outcomes that they've contributed to. So all findings, conclusions and recommendations for the evaluation process should be reported to the retrofit lead professional. And then finally, Clause 14 is about compliance. A claim of compliance should be made by the retrofit lead professional making the appropriate disclosure. So again, it's their responsibility to validate that the process has been followed from inception to handover, and for them to be in a position to then define and confirm that a certificate of compliance can be issued in alignment with PAS 2038. So what I've gone through there is a very much clause by clause approach about the role of the retrofit lead professional and how their role is interpreted by the standard, but it's not a defined list by any stretch. The retrofit lead professional can have a lot more of a hands-on experience or a hands-on role within the project. It's just really to give you an overview as a basis of what would enable a role to be compliant to the purpose of PAS 2038 there.
Austin,
so thank you for that.
Austin, a great question just come in from Hannah Reynolds. So does PAS 2038 actually mention CDM regs, so construction design management regulations, rules and requirements, or is it just assumed as implied by the wording?
It's certainly assumed. So it doesn't confirm specific legislation that must be followed throughout the project, but it is certainly assumed, yeah. The part that for the installation stage, when you look at kind of the reference to PAS 2030 or the reference to MCS, both of those standards make reference, MCS makes reference to the role of the installer being a principal contractor and the requirements of CDM. So yeah, some way through the trail, it's identified as CDM, so it should always be a consideration.
Another question from Josh. So currently for domestic, the assessor and coordinator have to be a member of a certification scheme when doing retrofit with funding. Absolutely. So your assessor, your coordinator will need to be trust marked, as will your installer need to be PAS 2030 accredited. Do you think that PAS 2038 would value from this too? My opinion is probably. I think, as you mentioned earlier, Austin, there's certainly an element of scope for PAS 2038 to be reviewed, very much the same as PAS 2035 and 2030. I think at the moment, in terms of the PAS 2038 requirements, there are fairly grey areas in terms of the definitions of the role. What is defined is the qualifications that are needed. So I think definitely it would add value to it. How that would look, from my opinion, I don't know, because there is a significantly detailed list of required skills, and quite often one contractor will subcontract a number of these required skills out because contractors may not necessarily have them within house. So yes, my answer to that is I think it would add value to PAS 2038, but how that would look, I don't know. What's your take, Austin?
I mean, I looked at an article about 6 months ago. I mean, the key instigator PAS 2038 that I see kind of in the market more recently is on the back of frameworks and on the back of PSDS funding. And I read an article about 6 months ago about the long-term intention was that there was going to be the funded mechanism tied into the requirements of PAS 2038. So similar to SHDF and a variety of domestic funding schemes, and the key defined roles there and how that drives on funding. The long-term vision that I read in this article, that it was going to be a similar aim that PAS 2038 and the defined roles in there were going to be tied into a funding mechanism. Obviously, that hasn't happened at the moment, and there'd be a big piece of work required to enable it to be used in that purpose. But I mean, it would be nice for collective benefit that it is used in that way, because I think it would certainly strengthen the utilisation of the standard. And I say that because the standard is utilised predominantly, it's driven a lot by installers, it's driven a lot by kind of building agents, and it just needs to be embraced more probably from building occupiers and owners. And I think that comes down through the drive of funding to enable that to happen, probably. Sorry, Josh, did you have a question there?
Yeah, it was just to follow on. It's the other side of that coin is like the compliance and the consumer protection side and the auditing and all that sort of thing. It currently PAS 2038 is sort of a document that's best practice, and it's kind of a free for all, and there's no consistency, I imagine, on what's actually being delivered currently. And so yeah, there's some sort of the if there's going to be funding, then it will start to tighten that barrier, that sort of route.
There's lots of things there. I mean, when we look at kind of MCS is for small renewable technologies. So anything that's of a significant size is covered within any kind of standard or document there. So at which point it's all kind of, there's all loose areas that really would need to be over a 3 to 5 year basis to kind of any tie into any kind of funding mechanism. Otherwise, I just can't see it happening anytime soon. Originally, PAS 2038 was intended to be a UCAS standard from the conversations I had, but that at the moment there isn't a clear roadmap on when that would become a UCAS standard. I think it's because of all the points that you just issued there, Josh, that guarantee providers, warranty providers, if you look in the market, none of them really suit commercial works because they don't want to take that level of liability on and that level of risk. So there's lots of mechanisms that need to be addressed to have this standard really move away from a best practice standard to something that can be used for funding or point of certification, really.
Yeah, that's a good question. Austin, next question. John Winters, how does the RLP compare to a clerk of works?
Oh, I like that one. Yeah, I mean, the retrofit lead professional, obviously, yeah, may involve at an earlier stage than typically a clerk of works, but fundamentally an effective clerk of works and an effective retrofit lead professional in terms of the outcome that they both want for a project should be very much aligned. Yeah, so fundamentally that there should be no reason why a clerk of works couldn't be an effective retrofit lead professional as long as they're clear around what that will consist of. Certainly so. I think from the on-site elements from a clerk of work, they'll be very well executed. Just in some of the questions we had on the slide, and I'll jump back onto that, in terms of from the experience that we've had and from looking at how other companies operate to PAS 2038, the retrofit lead professional could be a surveyor, could be a QS, could be a residential surveyor, it could be an appointed independent consultant. I've seen instances where bid managers have been utilised for the retrofit lead professional. It could be independent consultants. I think there's a kind of a wide range of existing roles within the market that are capable of fulfilling the role of the retrofit lead professional. I think the key part is just making sure that they're aware about what that role fundamentally consists of and about how they safeguard the client's interest for that point in time, because the majority of the retrofit lead professionals that I've seen are nominated by the installer and work on the installer side, which is great, and it's just making sure that they then understand how they can provide best practice for the clients. And I say that because I think we're probably all aware from some of the downsides of coordinators in the past is the coordinators identify installation measures and identify a package of measures that suit the installers that they're representing. And that's always been a big issue within the market. If we can make sure that the retrofit lead professional doesn't fall with that suit, as in they represent a insulation company or facade company, or they represent an M&E company, it's making sure that the holistic approach isn't deviated from their appointment is the fundamental part that we just all need to consider with that.
And the next question from Nicholas Phillips, and actually it ties in with one of our pre-submitted questions from Jake Dowling. So, domestic coordinator role carries a formal level 5 qualification. Is there or will there be a similar formal qualification for the RLP? I've seen no courses or reference to this date today. Then Jake's question ties in quite nicely in terms of, are there any plans in the future to develop a training course tailored to the retrofit lead professional role, or do you see the scope/role of the retrofit lead professional to be under constant review, and as such candidate requirements would be more project specific?
So just on the second bit of that, Laura, I mean, I've always had the viewpoint that the retrofit lead professional, once it does become a defined course, isn't intended to be a technical based course. That in my opinion, and again, this is just my thoughts, is that the course should equip the individuals with a comprehensive understanding of the more high level project management skills and considerations at various parts of the non-domestic project. It isn't there to identify whether they've facilitated a good design or whether the assessment has covered or gone into the level of detail. It should validate the assessment has covered everything by way of met the requirements of the standard, but not to then be in a position to technically challenge the assessor, because for someone to have that level of skills across a wide range of installations, I think would be near impossible. So I've always been on the viewpoint it's to equip any individuals with the prerequisite knowledge of non-domestic retrofit with the ability to facilitate that role. I mean, and just going on to the second part, I mean, I've had personal conversations with a variety of organisations, and other organisations are in the process of defining that retrofit lead professional course. And I know of one body that is looking to move forward with that. So hopefully, I'd be confident that over the next 6 to 12 months, there should be something in place to meet that need within the market.
Awesome. And then some other of the pre-submitted questions we had. So what does the role entail? So we've kind of covered that in the session. Where does the work come from? That's a very open-ended question in terms of the work. So the work is usually procured or funded, government funded work. And as we touched on this morning, quite a lot of contractors are seeing now that works that are being tendered for, there is a requirement for PAS 2038 within that, whether it's going to be running to the standard, the PAS 2038 standard, or whether they want the certified companies to PAS 2038. It tends to come as PAS 2035 from procured and funded works. What is the infrastructure? What infrastructure is required? So as we've touched on, we've got a project team which is going to be led by the Retrofit Lead Professional. There will be an assessor, there will be a designer, there will be an installer, and there will be an evaluator, which will usually be done by the Retrofit Lead Professional. So the infrastructure of PAS 2038, again, is very similar to that of 2035, but the specifications for each role are slightly different, especially in terms of project. An interesting one, Austin, what funding is currently available that this role could utilise?
In terms of training, or in terms of, so in terms of obviously the main one that organisations from an installation perspective and a client-driven perspective is the public sector decarbonisation scheme.
Yes,
so
yeah.
there was a recent award on that. So you're probably seeing that there's a high volume of tenders and award of installation works at the moment from a variety of NHS trusts and universities and various things like that. So at which point they're wanting organisations to be in a position to deliver that. And I think the part that we play collectively is, I see that a lot of organisations are awarding contracts for non-domestic retrofit and aren't stipulating the requirements of PAS 2038, which is absolutely fine, but we still can provide significant benefit to these stakeholders and informing them what that role consists of and what the standard is there to achieve, whether they exclusively apply that to their project or apply parts of that. But I think any positive discussion with clients that are awarding these contracts is beneficial to everyone that's involved in the project, really. I think we've all probably had, or collectively, we've all heard of stories or been involved in projects that haven't gone to plan, and the evaluation stage in PAS 2038 is there to identify what can be done next time to improve on that. And I think it's just these best practice processes that are fundamental to be instilled in every project. So that's why I'm saying it'd be great that every project is aligned to 2038. Realistically, that's not going to happen for a significant period of time. So any conversations or any applications of any small instances is a massive benefit to us all.
And I think Josh hit the nail on the head in terms of the compliance element. By running a project through a process such as PAS 2038, you are aligning and you are minimising any chances of any non-conformances, any issues. It is a process flow, and it is a very logical process flow. And it is to protect the interests, as we've said, of the client, public, the client, contractor, everybody involved. And I think that, you know, it's the argument of having the funding for a specific measure, but actually looking at that building as a holistic, in that holistic way, in the holistic approach. Looking at a building as one system is very, very different, significantly different, as looking at the building with individual systems. And it really is to have that overview and have that sustainability element. You know, we throw around words like retrofit and sustainability like there's no tomorrow, but actually when we really think about what those words mean, it is about improving our buildings to make them energy efficient so they are still standing 2050 and beyond. And this is what it aligns to. It aligns, it takes it from the domestic into the non-domestic. And you know, we've got a lot of large building stocks in the UK and we want to keep them in good nick, basically.
I mean, just on that, Laura, just one point that is quite nice in the 2038 is around this kind of, when we're carrying out the retrofit assessment, is this contextual element. So what the standard wants you to try and do is understand how individuals use that building and then understand their plans for the use of the building over a significant period of time. So then we can start addressing, what does that retrofit assessment look like? What does the post-evaluation look like to take these needs on board? So it looks at kind of high density areas, high use areas. All these kind of considerations need to be really formed quite strongly. It's not a case of just going in and out of that building and carrying out a one-dimensional retrofit assessment. As best practice, it should be done over a considerable amount of time, so then you get the most beneficial overview of that project there.
Perfect. And then another question from Nicholas Phillips. 3 levels of NDEA qualification. Is there a defined level of NDEA to be a suitable PAS 2038 assessor, or is that left open dependent on the building type to define the level of NDEA? So there is no specification that the assessor has to be a non-domestic energy assessor. So in terms of the assessment, we are doing the building assessment. We are looking at the energy outputs of the building. We are looking at predicted energy usage. We are looking at predicted costings. And one of the ways is doing an SBEM assessment. So if you are utilising SBEM as your energy assessment method, then yes, there is a need for the NDEA to be able to utilise that programme. And it will be absolutely dependent on the building type. I'm just double checking within the standard because I believe, and Austin, I'm not sure whether you can pick me up on this, but there is you can use passive house as well, and AN other, which always slips my mind.
Probably DSM.
Yeah, DSM is mentioned as well, or applied.
Yeah. So yeah, so there is no specific need if you're not using the SBEM method, but what the standard does say is whatever method you were assessing originally, you need to follow that method through. So again, SBEM is the typical method you would utilize for commercial buildings. So if you are using SBEM, then it will be NDEA.
Yeah, so sorry, Laura, the reason I posed the question is that a level 3 NDEA I would deem as not suitably qualified or experienced for PAS 2038. That's generally simplified buildings, typically retail lockup shops, very small buildings, less than 500 square meters, and simple HVAC. So the reason I posed the question is, it's in my mind, it needs to be defined as level 4 or level 5. Level 5 would typically be someone who uses DSM rather than SBEM.
Yeah, so what it actually states in the standard is, so if SBEM software is used, there is a requirement that the estimate of annual energy usage is prepared by a registered NDEA qualified at the level appropriate to the building. And that's what it states in the standard.
What we've just gone through there, that level 3 considerations is fundamentally driven of how they've interpreted how 2035 should be used. So under that 500 square meters, simplistic construction of masonry brick, low complexity HVAC systems all fall into that definition of level 3 there as well.
Fantastic. Now we are running out of time. We've got 2 minutes left. So Austin, I'm going to pop this question to you. Would ENERFIT assessment or certification via PHT be seen as equivalent to PAS 2038?
I think not offhand. Let me, I don't know who asked that question.
That is asked by
Mark.
It was Mark.
Do you want to give us an overview of why you think that, Mark? Sorry.
No, because I was straight off the top of my head. But Laura, kind of you would talk about passive house, so that's the same mob, isn't it? So
yeah.
I mean, obviously there'd be, if you drew a Venn diagram, I'm sure there'd be a huge overlap in the processes of the ENERFIT process and PAS 38. But
yeah, I mean, I'm under the understanding that passive house isn't aligned to 2038. So that's why I just made that quick reply. But I mean, I'll certainly do some investigation on that and feedback to everyone.
Yeah.
But if you were a passive house assessor, you'd probably make sure that you could offer both.
Can I take that, Austin? If you're a passive house assessor, you could certainly fulfill the assessor role within the standard, because it does say, following on from what we've just said about NDEA, passive house planning package, PHPP software. If our software is used, there's a requirement that the estimate of annual energy usage is prepared by a certified passive house consultant or passive house designer. So it can fulfill an element of PAS 2038 in terms of the, the estimate of annual energy usage, absolutely, but it wouldn't fulfill the standard of 2038.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And one more question. Does the risk assessment include climate change hazards and risks to the future impact and to the appropriateness of retrofit proposals? Future high temps, RH, wind-driven rain and possible flood subsidence are real risks often not considered. Yes, absolutely. That is included within the effectively agreement of intended outcomes. So all of that needs to be taken into consideration for that building, in terms of the climate, in terms of the usage, and in terms of aligning to the climate change targets. The sustainability element is a massive, massive element of that. So that will absolutely be taken into consideration within that. So it should be taken within that retrofit assessment effectively, and then continued through on the stages.
And it needs to be documented in the improvement plan, certainly. So that's part of the consideration there, is around those external factors, how that affects the statutory target of 2050, and what it applies to that building there as well.
Absolutely. And in terms of your retrofit assessment, you are going to be looking at the building very much the same as 2035. You're going to look at your high exposure areas, you're going to look at the building, you're going to look at defects, and then you're going to look at any kind of constraints as well within that assessment process in terms of environmental, technical, potentially social, and everything that you've just mentioned there, Hannah. So thank you for your question. Not a problem, Mark. Thank you ever so much. And we are 11:01, so I think it'd be quite nice to tie this up. So what I would say, guys, is thank you ever so much for your attendance this morning. Thank you so much for your integration and cooperation. We've popped a feedback form into the chat. So if anybody would like to give us some feedback, please click that. Feel free. It's a nice little form to do. On the same note, if anybody's got any further questions about the Retrofit Lead Professional, about PAS 2038, 2035, 2030 or brighter compliance, then I will pop my email in the chat. I'll pop Austin's email in the chat. Please feel free to give us a message, send us a message, or pop into the chat. But from me, I'd like to say thank you very much for a very enjoyable hour.
Thank you very much. And we'll send over the slide deck and recording as well to everyone on the call. So appreciate everyone. Have a great day and speak soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.